So I apologize for how long it's taken me to come out with another video. I had some personal matters that I had to deal with, but I'm available now and I'm coming out with my Gaetz and Giuliani video as promised. And a lot has happened regarding Matt Gaetz since I last brought it up, and as promised, I didn't bring it up in between. First and foremost, what needs to be covered is, ironically, on Matt Gaetz' first appearance in defending himself on these charges on Tucker Carlson, some might remember that he brought up pay to play and his ex-girlfriend being interviewed by the FBI. Well, ironically, a 2018-2019 trip to the Bahamas with a Florida doctor, hand surgeon / medical marijuana entrepreneur named Pirolozo, where he was with young girls who were so young that on the way back into the country, customs actually stopped and ID'd them because they looked so young, but they were technically all of age. Pirolozo apparently paid for that entire trip, and Matt Gaetz voted in favor of a medical marijuana bill passing while he was in the House. So now he is actually being accused of a pay-to-play scandal, which at the time he had given that Tucker Carlson interview, everyone was saying, there's no allegations of pay-to-play. Why is he bringing that up? And now, sure as I predicted in that original video that I made, there now are allegations that he's being accused of a pay-to-play scandal. And the ex-girlfriend becomes relevant too, because the feds apparently leaned on her so hard. Now, this is an ex-girlfriend who was of legal age, although he did meet her through the sugar daddy website. And I'm going to try to use the words alleged and allegedly when it's not a known fact, and just speak plainly when it is a known fact. She was his girlfriend, she was a staffer, she was of age, but she was also on that trip to the Bahamas, and in addition to pay to play, he's also being accused of violating what's called the Mann Act, which is transporting someone across state lines for the purposes of sex. She was on that trip. She can testify to the fact that there was allegedly sexual conduct on that trip and that those people were transported to the Bahamas for the purpose of having sex. So she's a potentially damaging witness to him for that. But what she's even more of a damaging witness to him for is in the way she can corroborate the allegations that are coming from Joel Greenberg. And this is where the case has really taken a turn. And I'm going to apologize in advance. I'm going to try to keep this as short and as sweet as possible. But allegedly, according to Joel Greenberg, who has pled guilty now to 6 of 32 allegations and is facing a maximum of 12 years only in prison in exchange for his cooperation with the feds. And they didn't name anybody in the plea agreement, but he did enter his plea on Saturday. We're still awaiting sentencing, but again, his max sentence is 12 years. The way they worded the plea deal, I have to point out and go off topic a little bit. In federal court, when you work out a cooperation agreement, it's called a proffer agreement. And what makes federal unique from state is, you think when I work out a cooperation agreement with the feds or the state or the prosecutors in general, that would mean any evidence that I give that would tend to inculpate myself, I'm excused from, right? I mean, why else would you agree to cooperate if if anything you say can be used against you? Well, that's true of a federal proffer agreement to an extent. Meaning, if I enter into a proffer agreement and they want me to give them all the evidence that I have, and I'm friends with Matt Gaetz, and so they know that, there are these sex crimes and alleged crimes, there's these receipts. So they put in the agreement, and they did put this in the agreement with Greenberg, that if he lies or omits anything, the agreement's null and void, all 32 counts are back on the table, and the full sentence is back in play, which is basically the rest of his life, could potentially. Well, let's say I robbed a bank with Matt Gaetz, and they don't know about that. So during my proffer with the feds, I tell them, because I'm obligated to tell them everything that happened, well, Matt Gaetz and I also robbed the Wells Fargo on Military Trail in Delray Beach, Florida in January 31st of 2021. Well, in the federal proffer agreement, they can't use that statement to come after me, so I'm still safe. But what they can do is they can take that statement, go to that Wells Fargo, and look at the videotape from January 31st. And if they find independent evidence on that video or from a witness at the Wells Fargo, even though they relied on my statement to get them to that Wells Fargo, they can actually use that evidence to turn around and re-indict me on bank robbery charges, even though I gave them the lead that goes there. In state court and regular court, we call that the fruit of the poisonous tree doctrine, meaning if you couldn't use the evidence that you're relying upon, you can't use any evidence that led you to, because it's fruit of the poisonous tree. Doesn't apply with federal court and the federal prosecutor's agreements unless you have a special one drawn up for you, which when I represent my clients, they know me for 16 years now. They know I won't let them sign a standard proffer agreement because they're not worth the paper they're printed on, because all they have to do is take the statement, look at where it leads them, and go get evidence from that source, and they can indict my client anyways. Greenberg's got the same problem in that he has to be completely honest, and he didn't get any special treatment in his agreement. So if, God forbid, he has to confess to a crime that they don't know about that he committed with Matt Gaetz, and bear in mind, Greenberg is not a reliable witness. I'll be the first one to admit that. But we have this whole Roger Stone confession letter that he wrote where he admits that he had sex with an underage girl. He admits that he paid for sex. He admits to the whole thing with the fake IDs. He admits to all of it in seeking a pardon from Roger Stone. He was going to pay Roger Stone $250,000 for this pardon in Bitcoin, which is just absurd. But Stone, I don't know if he ever really had any intention of trying to get him this pardon, but they were using the app Signal to communicate back and forth. And Stone was obviously letting these texts delete over Signal, as they do with Signal. Greenberg, being the mental giant that he is, screen captured every one of these text messages. So now the feds have this entire exchange, including Greenberg's extraordinarily detailed confession letter, which includes a ton of allegations against Matt Gaetz. And bear in mind, Stone was unable to acquire the pardon for Matt Gaetz, or for Greenberg, because of Matt Gaetz. And he told Joel Greenberg that, according to these Signal messages. So where does the ex-girlfriend come in? Well, Greenberg's not a reliable witness. He's already been banged for accusing an innocent man once in a text message where he had sent around, everybody needs to lawyer up, I'm being investigated. And one guy wrote back, dude, I didn't have anything to do with any of this. Leave me out of this. And it turns out the guy didn't, and Greenberg was just trying to misery loves company. But with Gaetz, they're trying to pin him down and hold him down tight. So they have him where he has to give out everything he knows. And remember, they have the Venmo receipts. They have these Stone text messages. They have all the stuff where Greenberg's accusing Gaetz. But it wouldn't be very difficult for Gaetz to say, Greenberg's not a reliable witness, he's a liar. He's actually a convicted liar because he was falsifying those identifications. That's forgery. Forgery is a crime that you can use to discredit someone on the stand. It goes directly to your credibility. The ex-girlfriend, now mind you, the 17-year-old that Greenberg admitted to having sex with and that Gaetz is also accused of having sex with, she was also pressured into cooperating by the feds. The only problem is she's now an adult film star, so her credibility is kind of rocky. But this ex-girlfriend that the feds have leaned on with threats of obstruction of justice, which is the same thing they used to get the former 17-year-old that Gaetz and Greenberg are both accused of the sugar daddy website and paying for sex and transporting across state lines. This girlfriend was met through that website, but she was a staffer in the congressional office. She was Gaetz's girlfriend at the time. She can give background color and she can give support to any statements that Greenberg makes. She can explain a lot of those receipts that are marked tuition, cash payments, food, travel, lodging, all that stuff. And she was on this trip to the Bahamas with the hand surgeon, which raises the whole pay-to-play issue. And remember, this whole thing was started under Bill Barr's investigation running of the Justice Department. It was a Bill Barr-sponsored investigation. So as of right now, Greenberg hasn't been sentenced, but keep an eye out for how big that sentence is. The fact that it's capped at 12 years tells you already he's serving Matt Gaetz up to the feds on a platter, because they could have had him for 40, 50 years on the charges that they have. And Gaetz is looking at a slew of charges. He's looking at almost as many charges as Greenberg. As a matter of fact, it's been told, and according to Greenberg's statements, that Gaetz came into the Florida DMV and saw Greenberg's false ID making operation, which could make him liable with accessory responsibility in that charge. Meaning, Gaetz could be facing as many charges as Greenberg, and he won't have anybody to trade up on. So while Greenberg's looking at a max of 12 years, Matt Gaetz is running around the country right now with Marjorie Taylor Greene on his, QAnon crazy, well, I shouldn't say that because I'm trying to stay as neutral as possible, so I'll just say his QAnon sponsored, the election was stolen, blah, 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 tour. It's not going to fly, and it's not going to work because it started under Bill Barr for him too, and they're going to be able to back all this stuff up because that girlfriend is a rock solid. The ex-girlfriend of Matt Gaetz is a rock solid witness. So while I was hoping before I made this video for there to be a little bit more, I was hoping that maybe Greenberg will have been sentenced so we'll really know how much cooperation he's giving. The fact that he's capped at 12 years pretty much tells you that Gaetz is going to get indicted, and he's going to get indicted for virtually everything that Greenberg was indicted for, because the Greenberg confession letter implicates Matt Gaetz in pretty much everything Greenberg did, with the exception of embezzling the tax money. But then Gaetz has the pay for play scandal with the Joel Pirolozo hand surgeon situation where he voted in favor of medical marijuana, and the guy was a medical marijuana specialist. So where does that bring us? That brings us to Rudy Giuliani. Well, that one's quick, simple, and easy. Giuliani also had his investigation against him started with the Bill Barr Justice Department. So what does that mean? That means his allegations that it's Biden trying to get him and that they should be looking at Biden's laptop has no merit. And his thing about them seizing his iCloud being a crime, that's not a crime. They're allowed to seize that information, and it was seized by Bill Barr's Justice Department. So he's pointing fingers in the wrong direction, and he's throwing shade in the dark because it started before Biden became president. It started under Trump. The big issue here is that Trump was his client at the time, and as an attorney, I can tell you if I get stopped and my trial bag is sitting in the back of my car and the police catch me drinking a beer while I'm driving, well, now they have probable cause to search my car, a search incident to arrest. I'm technically violated drinking while driving. I'm under arrest. You can search my car. You can't go in my trial bag because I'm a lawyer, and what's in there is potentially confidential information involving clients of mine. Trump was Giuliani's client, and that's what this whole case is going to turn on. When Giuliani was down in the Ukraine, was he working on behalf of Trump, or was he working on behalf of the Ukrainians? And they're focusing on his ousting of Maria Yovanovitch. And the reason why it's going to be very difficult for Giuliani to argue he was working for Trump is because Trump, as president at the time, didn't need any dirt from Giuliani down in the Ukraine to get rid of Maria Yovanovitch. He could have done it with the stroke of a pen. As the president, they all serve at his pleasure. He can fire an ambassador literally with the stroke of a pen. All he has, with picking up a phone, he could have called her and said, "You're fired." That's it. Didn't need Giuliani. So I'm assuming, because in order to get the warrant to go through his office and seize all of his devices, it's more than the standard apply to a prosecutor reviews the facts. First an FBI officer has to swear out an affidavit under oath, get it notarized. These are the facts that lead me to believe I have probable cause to go search. Hand it to a prosecutor reads it, signs it, hand it to a judge reads it, makes sure that it all meets, there's no constitutional issues, signs it, goes back to the FBI officer, valid warrant. In order to get into a lawyer's office like they did with Cohen and like they did with Giuliani, and remember they did this before Biden's Justice Department, before the former Supreme Court nominee who never got a vote in the Senate became the head of the Justice Department. They did this under Barr's Justice Department. They signed off on it, which means they weren't concerned that he was acting on behalf of the president. So Giuliani's kind of done smart. He must have lawyered up and found somebody, although now I understand the big issue is he wants Trump to pay for his legal defense because he's claiming I was representing you at the time. And Trump is, of course, rightfully and smartly claiming you weren't working for me while you were down in the Ukraine. You were on your own. And if you'll remember, there was that Chris Cuomo interview where Cuomo asked him, were you asking the Ukrainians to investigate Joe Biden? No, I wasn't asking the Ukrainians to investigate Joe Biden. Are you sure you didn't ask the Ukrainians? Of course I did! And he came out and confessed it on live TV, and everybody kind of said, that's going to come back and bite him. Right now, that's it biting him. So I would keep a close eye on both of them, because Giuliani apparently isn't getting any help from Trump, although he's been smart and has laid low and kept his mouth shut. But I would expect sitting back as a totally neutral observer of the law. And remember, I'm a criminal defense attorney. My mind typically goes towards, how can I bust up this warrant? How can I bust up this case? In the case of Matt Gaetz, I got nothing. I mean, I'll be honest with you, other than attacking the credibility of Greenberg and the 17-year-old and Rape Shield, nobody seems to be bringing this up. Rape Shield prevents you from going after the victim in any way. So you can't even really use the fact that she's an adult film star to bust up her credibility, because that's not a crime and it doesn't go to your credibility, unlike with Joel Greenberg, where forging IDs is a crime of credibility. It is a crime of truthfulness and honor. So you can use that. Rape Shield prevents you from using a victim's sexual history or even their even that she's now entered the sex field as a trade against them. So since she's the victim of the crime, I wouldn't even expect to be able to use that. So even when I was trying to think in my head how I would defend Gaetz, and I'm hearing people say, you know, she's not that credible because she works in the sex trade, I've had to defend people who've been accused of sexual assault. They won't let you go after the victim at all. Never mind straight at sex. That's impossible. That's just not something you can do. So as someone who does this for a living and does this pretty much every day, unfortunately, and gets exposed to, you know, the worst society has to offer, I can tell you, I got nothing for Gaetz. I mean, I'm surprised the indictment hasn't come yet. They're obviously doing what the feds always do, and I've had cases against them, and they're famous for this. They will build such an ironclad case that when they make the arrest and they finally get through with it and you lawyer up, there's like a truck that backs up to your office and just starts unloading copy paper printer boxes full of wiretap transfers, documentary evidence, sworn statements under oath. And it's like 26, 28 straight hours worth of work just to go through the initial evidence that the feds have combined before they make the arrest. In state court, they get probable cause, they make the arrest, then they go forward with the investigation. The feds, they make sure that they have it sewed up on every corner before they even make the indictment, so that the defense attorney is just stuck, just tied with his hands behind his back. And I know because I'm on the federal public defender wheel, meaning I could be chosen at any time to be a PD for anyone charged with a federal crime in Connecticut. And anytime I get a case, that's how it goes down. So I'm telling everybody in as neutral a manner and as clear-headed a manner as I can, and I have worked in the state prosecutor's office all through law school, thinking I would be a prosecutor. Gaetz has no chance. I mean, he should enjoy this time on the road with Marjorie Taylor Greene, because that photograph of him in the orange jumpsuit from the DUI, that's how Matt Gaetz is going to be remembered. As for Rudy, it's all going to come down to whether or not he violated FARA. And if you don't think you can go to jail for FARA, just look at Michael Flynn. If he hadn't caught that last-minute pardon, he'd be in jail right now for violating the Foreign Agent Registry Act. And that's what Giuliani's facing, because if he was working on behalf of the Ukrainians in any manner, shape, or form, and there is proof that he accepted money from them, he violated FARA, and he's going to go to jail. So leave your questions and comments as always. That's what I have for you on this. If anybody has a follow-up question or needs a follow-up video, I'd be happy to address it. I believe I covered everything. I don't think there's anything I'm missing, but if someone thinks I missed something, by all means let me know. I appreciate your comments, your likes, and your subscriptions. I'm not going to ask you to hit the subscribe button or the like button or anything, because that's just not me. But I apologize for the gap. I had a personal issue. I will be back with another video when more news drops. And as always, I appreciate your time. Sorry this one was a little bit longer than usual, but I had to cover two. Thanks. Be safe, be healthy, everybody.